Before we begin, I want to let you know that this series features themes of violence, school shootings, and systemic racism. Please be advised. It was a cold Monday evening in East Lansing, Michigan, just a few degrees below freezing. The type of weather that, in less hardy states, would keep people home. But in Michigan, freezing temperatures are nothing special and didn't deter the droves of people who showed up to East Lansing High School that night.
Good evening. I'm going to call the January 23rd, 2023 regular meeting of the East Lansing Board of Education to order.
The meeting was so packed that attendees spilled out into the halls.
Here to talk to you guys tonight about reoccurring violence at East Lansing High School.
Over the next 3 hours, students, parents, and teachers shared their fears about an outbreak of violence at the high school. They told stories of vape and marijuana smoke-filled bathrooms where fights often broke out, and videos of violent brawls that circulated in group chats.
This is not a little bit of pushing around. Someone is going to get killed here. Someone is going to die at this school.
Every time I step into a hallway, I wonder if there's someone that may have a firearm. That's not something a student should have to think about.
But for students at East Lansing High School, this meeting wasn't the end. A chain of events would unfold, leaving behind big questions about school safety and racial equity, and would trigger a reckoning over a decision made 2.5 years before to remove police from their schools.
There used to be cops in the school. There aren't now. They need to be in here.
And like so many American stories, it revolves around a gun.
And I turned my back on the one student who I found out the next day had a gun.
This is wrong. This is a Columbine accident waiting to happen.
And take politics and race out of it, because if there's an active shooter, I don't care what they are.
I'm Emily Reeves, and this is Violence Week. Chapter 1. If you've ever asked somebody from Michigan where they're from, they've probably held out their hand and pointed. 'Cause, Michigan looks like a hand. It's a bit dorky, but I do it too. I proudly point to the soft center of my palm and say, I'm from East Lansing, Michigan. Head straight east from the state's Capitol building, and in 10 minutes, you'll reach East Lansing. You'll know you've arrived when you see the beautiful brick buildings of Michigan State University and groups of college students dressed in green and white playing beer pong on front lawns.
Michigan State University! Go Green! Go Green!
Michigan State wins it in overtime!
East Lansing is a quintessential college town. It's the kind of town where family friends tell stories about waking up to find a drunk college kid sleeping on their couch.
1, 2, 3, go!
The kind of town where locals avoid downtown like the plague on a football Saturday. Where my high school was directly next door to a sorority. It's the kind of town where, in the span of 24 hours at the end of every August, the sleepy streets transform overnight with the sudden arrival of thousands of students. But I'm here in those final lazy days of summer, before the students return. I'm back because I can't stop thinking about a series of events that happened at my alma mater, East Lansing High School. These days, I make podcasts. But when I was in high school, I was a theater kid and a student journalist. Editor-in-chief of the yearbook, thank you very much. So I knew exactly who to go to get the inside scoop.
Being on the paper, it was weird during that time because we were all dealing with our own stuff, being scared about what was going on. But we were like, we're journalists. We have to figure a way to cover this.
This is Kyra Bay, a rising senior at East Lansing High School. I met up with her during the final weeks of summer break, while she was volunteering at the local library. She came prepared with an old edition of the school's newspaper in hand, and opened it up to review a timeline of the complicated events we were here to discuss.
I mean, it's all we could talk about for a really long time. It was so stressful for all of us, the teachers, the students. It was just not a good moment to be in East Lansing.
Kyra's an editor for The Portrait, the school's newspaper, and a co-president of the Black Student Union. She's warm and funny, and you only have to talk to her for a minute or two to realize just how smart she is.
So I joined East Lansing in 5th grade, and I came from Lansing schools, and it was a big culture shock. You know, the first thing I would say is they're bougie. I would say that first, to be honest. But even though they're bougie here, they really do value education. So I'm really fortunate to be able to go to East Lansing.
I feel really fortunate to have gone to school here too. Everyone I talked to for this story told me that their families came to East Lansing for the schools. The district has a long-held reputation for being one of the best in the area. And with a nearly even split between white kids like me and minority students, the school takes a lot of pride in its diversity. My high school years were, all things considered, pretty great. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you that they were the best years of my life. But I know I was lucky to go there. The school has tons of well-funded after-school activities and AP classes, and the real brainiacs could go take actual college classes at Michigan State. But for students like Kyra, who started their senior year this fall, very little about their high school experience has been normal.
The number of cases soaring just today. More than 24,000
has announced the closure, as we mentioned, of all schools K through 12.
What this means in terms of a school.
They were in their final months of middle school when COVID shut the world down. And they would spend their first years of high school online or adjusting to constantly shifting safety protocols. And when they did return in person, teachers and administrators noticed a sharp rise in violent behavior.
I mean, fights at EL have always, been a thing, but then they just kept happening over and over and over again.
I can attest. Fights have always happened at the schools. I vividly remember the chaos that would break out as someone shouted, "Fight!" across the locker commons. But in late 2022, students and teachers at East Lansing felt like the violence that was going on wasn't at a normal level.
There was a group of boys at school. Keep in mind that throughout all of this, it was the same group of boys, and got to the point where they're just fighting all the time.
And these fights just kept escalating, getting more and more violent throughout the year.
I knew the people who were getting into those fights, and honestly, I was just like, guys, what are you doing? When I would see them come in with a broken arm or something, I'd be like, is this what we want? Do we need to be doing this all the time?
Teachers asked administration for more support. A few concerned parents made public comments at school board meetings. But still, the tension largely boiled under the surface. That is, until January 19th, 2023, after an evening basketball game, when a fight broke out in the school's parking lot and changed everything.
I opened my phone to a group chat just blow up of people talking about what happened at the basketball game.
This is Maggie Beaver, another editor for The Portrait and a rising senior at the school.
There were a group of boys who were fighting, and a teacher intervened, and one of the boys picked up his backpack and a gun fell out.
The next morning, some of those students were back at school. When administrators pulled them out of their morning classes, another fight between the groups broke out in the hallway.
The next day at school, which was a Friday, that wasn't communicated. Administrators didn't tell us that there was a gun at the basketball game, but everybody knew, of course, because, gossip.
The school was just filled with misinformation because no one knew what really happened. At some point, I remember hearing that someone had shot another person.
And so for that to come out from the students who were there and not from administrators, teachers and parents, they were really mad because we felt unsafe. How are you not going to tell us that there was that danger?
The student who had the gun was no longer an in-person student. He had been moved to online school for disciplinary reasons. But for many in the community, this didn't matter. There was a gun at school, and it freaked everyone out. By Monday's school board meeting, news of the gun had spread across East Lansing.
Here to talk to you guys tonight about reoccurring violence at East Lansing High School.
In a meeting that stretched late into the night, teachers, students, and parents got up to share their accounts of the fight.
And I turn the corner and all I see is 20 kids swinging at each other. And Miss Ink is the only one there. So the only thing I can think of was get out. I hope one of the best teachers that we have at this school.
You could hear heads hitting on vehicle windows, fists hitting windows as kids were missing.
And little did I know there was a firearm within 4 feet of me. And I had no clue. On my own school property.
And I turned my back on the one student who I found out the next day had a gun. That's how my night ended. And I didn't find out about till Friday. And
shared just how unsafe all of this made everyone feel.
Recently, I've seen videos of these fights, and they are greatly alarming in serious fights.
I don't want to explain to my kids any longer why fights of this magnitude, this violence, are happening every day. And I sure as hell don't want to answer to my kid when a shooting or something worse happens in this school district, because we're heading down that path.
At the heart of everything, students are all aware of the many school shootings that have taken place in the past few years.
I had to walk out of my 3rd hour on Friday because I received a text from my mom. She told me not to swear, but she said, "What the F word is going on at East Lansing High School? Is there a gun?" I was shaking. I was in hives. If anything happens to my peers, I am holding the board accountable.
I acknowledge that and apologize to all of you.
Even the superintendent was in tears.
For the fear and anxiety that those mistakes caused. We can and will do better.
For Gabe Benavides, this atmosphere was shocking. Gabe served as the student government's representative to the board. So unlike most students, he had attended school board meetings before, but none like this.
There's never been a meeting before where there was that many people. Like every single teacher I've ever had, like teacher I haven't seen since elementary schools were there. And it was just packed.
As student representative, Gabe knew he had to give a speech, but he hadn't prepared for this.
So I'm like shocked and super like nervous. And like I like didn't prepare. And so I like got up there. And I kind of just like spoke my mind and like I got into like a rhythm.
I feel as though our community has reached a breaking point. These fights are happening with the same group of people. I've been made aware today that a group of teachers went to the school board, went to the administration, and wanted these kids to be removed from our school. And they were told that they would not consider that because it was a problem of equity.
Here's where you need to know that the boys who were fighting were Black. And like I said before, East Lansing schools are diverse and proud of it. But there are still racial and economic disparities at the school. And in an effort to reduce these disparities, the school had recently changed their disciplinary policies.
And that is very upsetting to hear as an African-American male. The color of my skin should not dictate the consequences to my actions. When I was a sophomore in high school, COVID hit, and I'm on the cross-country team.
Gabe then shared a story about how during COVID, nearby school districts allowed non-contact sports like cross-country and golf to continue. But at East Lansing, Gabe's team was told that they couldn't compete.
I received an email telling me that why I could not participate is because of equity. Because African-American dominated sport such as football and basketball could not play, so a white dominated sport could not play. If you looked at our varsity team that year, we had 7 guys on varsity, 4 of whom were African-American, 2 of whom were Asian, and 1 was white.
To Gabe, the school's decision to cancel his cross-country season because it was a white-dominated sport connected to what was happening right now. To him, it was all a reflection of how the school's equity policies were often misguided.
My safety should not be a problem of equity. It should be a problem of right and wrong. As an African American, it seems as though the school board pulls out the equity card when dealing with tough decisions because they are scared of being called racist. After the fight, the students who were involved were allowed to come back to school the very next day.
He connected these events to a general lack of consequences for students. And a lot of people there agreed. They saw what had happened as a direct result of lax standards for behavior, driven by the school's equity commitments.
Board policy has essentially exempted all students from serious consequences of any kind. Students openly talk about it right in front of us, that there are no real consequences for bad behavior. They know it, and we know it.
You see, the school had recently moved to using restorative justice sessions instead of suspensions and expulsions whenever possible. This switch was motivated by a desire to improve racial equity and has been a trend in schools across the country. As educators started to understand the ways zero-tolerance discipline policies were harming kids, restorative justice gained popularity in schools that wanted an alternative.
We understand East Lansing's on the cutting edge of social justice intervention, so we knew there would be challenges. But clearly right now there are too many educators frustrated with the policies that are in place.
Restorative justice does not work. You continue to put my child's life in danger.
What we have is a crisis of common sense. This room is a flashing red sign. Your teachers are screaming at you every day, and I know this is not new. And what we get is more PhD level analyses.
And take politics and race out of it, because if there's an active shooter, I don't care what they are.
But for East Lansing, that dramatic meeting on Monday was just the beginning of a tumultuous week. When that gun fell onto the parking lot's asphalt, it was only the first in a series of back-to-back alarming incidents at the high school that would unfold over the next 7 days. The school's student journalists eventually named this chain of events Violence Week, like Spirit Week, but less fun. The very next day, the school went into a shelter-in-place after a report of a possible weapon in the building.
It honestly felt like a fever dream. And so we were all freaking out, like we were hiding. A lot of people were calling their parents, crying. I was crying. I didn't know, honestly didn't know, like, what if I don't get to see my mom again? It was very scary. And people that I had never, seen emotional before were upset because they didn't know what was going on.
No weapon was found. But for students, it heightened an already tense atmosphere.
And so it definitely just showed a change in how we all were since the beginning of the fights. Because if there was a gun at that basketball game, which there was, then what's to say there's not a gun here right now?
On Wednesday, the school had a snow day.
There was a snow day. And snow day. There was no snow. We all just kind of rolled eyes when they called the snow day because it's like, we know what you're doing and you can't lie to us about it.
On Thursday, students staged a walkout.
Violence has been an ongoing issue at our school, but nothing has been done or will be done until someone sees a gun.
Which was almost immediately followed by another shelter in place after a suspended student was heard making threats towards the administration.
It's scary because you don't know what's real and what isn't at this point. At one point, there was someone saying that we had maybe like 3 intruders in the building, or there was a suspended student with a gun, or someone attacked a teacher. And so honestly, we had no idea what was going on.
After that shelter in place, another violent fight broke out in the bathrooms.
It was like a lot of different emotions, a lot of different opinions, just like chaos. Like that's how I can describe it. It was just like chaos. Like you just like go to school and your teachers are all emotional, and then like a fight happens and then people are like, oh my God, or there's like a lockdown, or there's rumors of like another gun being in the school. Parents are like taking kids out of class and like school gets canceled the next day. Like there's just so much going on. I don't even know if I did schoolwork that week.
It was scary, and it was just a lot to deal with, and I would really rather be working on my science homework right now,
School was canceled on Friday, but the fear and tension in the community wasn't over.
It's really scary because it was all back to back. Like this was all day after day after day. I remember I was gonna type something up and put in my notes app for my mom just in case. Because like, I wanted her to at least have something. Like if they took our phones away and I wouldn't be able to get something to my mom, I would want her to have something. I'm sorry. It was really stressful. Like it was really scary because we just wanted to go to school and learn and have fun with our friends. Like this is high school. Why do we have to be worried about if this is the day that they're finally going to bring guns in here and we're going to die? That's not something that we want to think about.
I couldn't help but wonder how all this would have gone differently when I was a teenager. I went to school here years after Columbine, so we had lockdown drills, but we goofed around during them. I really never thought about school shootings. They didn't seem like the ever-present reality they are now.
This is our world now. Like we always have to think about what's going to happen if there's a school shooting and how are we going to get out alive. And that's a discussion that I would sometimes even have with my friends on the first day, like, oh, like, what's your schedule just in case something happens and I need to come find you? Or like, what in the classroom can be used as a weapon to protect yourself if there's a school shooting. We didn't have conversations about like, you're luckiest if you're in the art hallway because in the ceramics room, there's so many weapons that you could protect yourself with against a shooter. Those are the conversations we'd be having.
You might be wondering why these boys were fighting in the first place. And I'm sorry to ruin the suspense, but we're not going to find out. To me, a group of high schoolers beefing isn't what makes this story worthy of a deeper examination. And I don't feel great about shining more light on the mistakes of a bunch of teenagers. Instead, I felt like there was something bigger to be gained in the community's reaction. Maybe some bigger understanding of our country could be found deep in their panic. As I watched my old teachers cry and these parents rage, maybe what I was really watching was a country scarred by an enduring cycle of school shootings. Month after month, year after year. Was this anxiety another price of us not doing anything about gun violence? For East Lansing, the discovery of the gun and Violence Week led to a community crisis. Over the next few months, school board meetings were moved to the high school's enormous auditorium to accommodate the large crowds. They came to debate big questions about school safety, discipline, and racial equity policies. And, for the first time, the fact that there were no police officers in the school came under fierce scrutiny.
Administrators are tackling kids on the floor. We have no help. We didn't have time to call 911. I wish I had had someone there, like a school resource officer, that could have gotten on his radio and said, we need help.
School resource officers, or SROs, are sworn police officers who, typically in a partnership between the local school district and the police department, are stationed to work within a school.
This is wrong. This is a Columbine accident waiting to happen. I have said that over and over again. There is no metal detectors. There are no police here. The police don't even care about coming out here because of the attitude of the school board, who doesn't give a shit.
See, for some in the community, the story of what happened during Violence Week really starts back in June 2020. Exactly 2 weeks after the murder of George Floyd. At an online school board meeting, riddled with audio problems and all too familiar struggles with unmuting.
We can hear you, yes. Get it yet? Yes.
When the school's superintendent read out a letter.
The LPS administrative team would like to share its collective commitments and action in response to the senseless murder of George Floyd and the long-standing racial...
She read a list of commitments from the administration that included changes to disciplinary policies, hiring more Black teachers, curriculum changes, establishing equity teams at each building, and
ELPS will no longer employ a school resource officer and will remove police presence in our school buildings.
The decision to no longer have a police officer in the building. Since schools wouldn't return to fully normal for well over a year, these new policies didn't get much immediate attention. But flash forward 2.5 years to the discovery of the gun, that decision became a major focal point during these heated school board meetings.
There used to be cops in the school. There aren't now. They need to be in here. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what size. I don't care what race or what you identify as. We need police officers in this school now, today. It should have been Friday.
Hey, I don't care what color you are. You can feel some type of way, whatever you want to. This school needs to have at least 2 security officers, at least. And I would be, I don't know if I'd be reluctant, but might need a resource officer back as well.
I again urge you to just measure the consequence of having them versus the consequence of not having them. It appears to me that the consequence of having them is that it may offend the sensibilities of members of this community. right? Another consequence of having them is that people might get into trouble. But why don't we weigh that against the consequence of not having them in the unfortunate times and more frequent times when you need them?
For some in the community, the school's decision to remove police put kids in danger of gun violence. For others, the calls for them to return put students of color at risk.
I am not for a resource officer in this district. I don't think that provides safety. What it does is it provides compliance through the threat of force, and that does not build community.
The core of this district is rotten. It cannot be solved with a few weekend meetings and a couple emails, and definitely not by hiring officers who will only misuse their power and abuse Black and brown students like they have in the past.
We've already started to make reactive changes, forgetting that we pride ourselves in leading a future focused on equity and nurturing all of our kids.
East Lansing isn't the only district to have something like this happen. In the weeks and months following the murder of George Floyd, over 30 districts around the country changed their relationship with police. Districts in Seattle, San Francisco, Madison, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Portland, Maine, and Portland, Oregon, among many others, have ended their school resource officer programs. Other districts like Chicago and LA majorly cut their policing budgets and reappropriated the funds. But just like in East Lansing, violent events have made some schools reconsider. In Montgomery County, Maryland, and Denver, Colorado, school districts reinstated police presence after school shootings.
Motion passes. There we go. Thank you.
With that unanimous vote 3 years ago, Denver School Board removed Denver Police School Resource Officers from campuses. Flash forward to Wednesday, another school shooting press conference and a plan to bring police back to East High.
We will have 2 armed officers here at East until the end of the school year.
There's a lot more to the story than just policing. When I first set out to investigate what happened, I thought this story existed right in the middle of some crazy Venn diagram of America's fear of school shootings, the role of police, and efforts to improve racial equity in schools. But the more I learned, the more circles I added. A post-COVID rise in violence, the complexities of switching from the era of zero tolerance in schools towards restorative justice, America's polarizing views on policing. I kept adding circles to my Venn diagram until I felt dizzy. But still, the issue of policing stood out to me. Fights and school shootings are 2 very different things. But it struck me as important that the discovery of the gun was the catalyst for this community crisis. And the conversation around bringing police officers back to East Lansing revolved around the fear of school shootings. In America, views on policing are as split as our electoral maps. There are wide racial and partisan gaps in how we view police conduct. And this split was on display even in somewhere like East Lansing, which is one of Michigan's most liberal cities. So how can we make decisions on policing and school safety when police make some feel safer and others feel in danger? And what would East Lansing, this community that prides itself on diversity and inclusion, decide to do? Whenever the school board was questioned about this decision, this one incident was always brought up.
Let me say this. When I ran for school board for the first time 12 years ago, there was a child who had been tased here in our school district.
This stood out to me because I remember this. I was at the high school that day in 2010 as a student, and it was a big deal. Next time on Violence Week.
You had your hands up saying, what did I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. That's when he tased him.
It just made me be like, they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want.
I said, you have mistreated my child. And he was like, I stand for all kids. I said, as long as they don't have no color.
Violence Week is produced and hosted by me, Emily Reeves. My sound engineer is Corey Choi, with assistance from Christian Cuccinello. Special thanks to Tony Williams, Feyisayo Aluko, Liam O'Brien, and Sierra Fitch. Fact-checking by Nancy Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Reagan Sprinkle. Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Violence Week is a Silver Podcast Network production. Thanks for listening.